Welcome back to Undo Unplugged. I'm Erin Harris, founder of Undo Mindset and a former educator.
And I'm Darren Norris. I'm the owner-operator for Flying Pig Psychotherapy, which is a therapy practice located in Parker, Colorado. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. This podcast is all about practical strategies and inspiring stories that help shift mindsets, foster positive thinking, and unlock your true potential.
I'm really excited. We're starting our second season. And in this season, we're really exploring Raising Minds, a journey through K-12 mental health, where we'll really dive deep into the challenges students are facing at every stage of their educational journey, and then how us as their support system can really help to make a difference in their lives.
So today we're focusing on real voices and lived experiences. Mental health is not just about statistics. It's about the real students navigating everyday challenges in the classroom. So in this episode, you'll hear powerful stories from real people at different stages of their educational experience, shedding light on the struggles, resilience, and the support that made a difference.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and let's dive right in. Let's start really looking at those early years. I always like to ground ourselves in these conversations. Darren knows this. Early years, where does our expertise lie? I will just lay this foundation and just add that I have been an educator for 15 years. I taught every grade K through 8. And then I've also am raising 2 children of my own. I think the early years are really informative years, especially when we talk about our students and our children's mental health. I'm curious to know, Darren, what are you seeing, or what challenges are you seeing with our younger students they're facing in their educational journey?
I primarily work with adults, so I'm better equipped to answer the question, how are the parents responding as their kids are dealing with this? And as with everything, it's varied. Some people think it's a great experience. Some people think it's a highly stressful one. But having kids of my own, it's a challenge.
Yeah. I also think, though, you probably have pretty deep insight as well, because as somebody who's considered an expert in this world, I'm sure that you have people who approach you with suggestions and stories and things like that, just given your insight into kind of this big challenge we're facing, not only just in our country, but globally. So let's go ahead and let's dive deep into those elementary school students. What is their challenge? What are their challenges? What are their stresses? What are some of the things that really cause them to have some more mental health challenges within these environments? I think it's really important to name that in elementary school, you're very much establishing your social foundation, your academic foundation. You're really trying to work on forming like friendships, how to understand balancing pressure between peers and the academics and a lot of different adults in your world. It's really about understanding and developing your emotions. How are you responding to your emotions? How are you identifying those discomforts within the emotional spectrum in your own being? How are you accessing and getting supports within those environments?
You're going to probably use different words than that. It'd be like, I am good, I am bad, I'm smart, I'm dumb, I am strong, I am weak. Again, we're 2 adults having this conversation, so we're gonna talk like adults because we are. But there's this concept of the I am and how I fit in this world.
Well, and okay, so can you ground us? How old are your kids currently?
I have an 8-year-old, almost a 12-year-old, and coming up on 14-year-old.
So I have an almost 9-year-old and I have a 13-year-old. So my 9-year-old's a girl and my 13-year-old's a boy. And I think that, I always put myself in their positions. They're being raised in a world that is so different than anything we experienced. So it's really hard for us. Sometimes I think us as parents, we take the perspective of their experience must be the same as our experience because we all have gone to school. We all understand these different social pressures, academic pressures, and we assume that their lived experience is just as tangible as ours was. But I think it is important to recognize that it is very different. And there are very different stressors. So what are some of those stressors that we are seeing at an elementary level? Besides the ones I, listed, let's talk through them a little deeper. What do you think? What are you seeing?
I was going to throw out their tech. With COVID, everybody got sent home. Granted, this is now 5 years ago, but everybody got sent home. And you have, say, a second grader we're going to log on to your computer. It's like, I barely can spell, let alone how am I going to turn assignments in and run this operating system or the equivalent? How am I going to run this and get my stuff in? So I guess there's a lot more tech exposure now. Maybe that's the silver lining to some extent, is like there's earlier tech exposure, but if you've ever listened to us before, I have a mixed relationship with tech and children.
Well, I also think, let's talk about tech, because I think technology is so imperative to discuss at every stage. And I think that like kids are very social beings, right? And so the technological component is appealing to them because it really opens up that social connection that they're seeking. You know, my son will play video games, and sometimes like that's his version of having a play date, right? It's very much something that they seek out because it helps to, fix some of their boredoms, or, the times where we had to sit still as kids and just kind of be zoned out or whatever. They're always looking to kind of fill those spaces.
Here, I'll jump in. The concept of boredom. I was an only child. If you didn't live on a street with a lot of kids, you had a lot of boredom time. Now, I very rarely will hear I'm bored because there's the iPad, there's the TV, there's the Nintendo, there's the other gaming console. It's like, again, all electronic. The concept of just being, I am bored, and we're talking at the elementary ages, like, you and I probably spent a lot of time bored and we turned out okay. But like boredom is now almost aversive, like, how dare I be bored?
I always tell my kids, being bored is a learned skill. Like, you actually have to learn how to like drive from point A to point B without having technology in your face all the time. Like, it's just part of, as an adult, there's lots of moments in our lives that are bored. But I think in addition to that, it's also like very much creating them to be almost like having harder interactions in person, right? It's very much a coping mechanism. It's a way to step away from reality and avoid processing some of those hard emotions. I think that it is a distraction from, doing the things that are challenging, but make us sometimes feel more accomplished and more capable in life. Maybe it's a distraction from doing my homework or my chores or these things that will help me to further my journey. But I think that it is a way to almost like numb our brains from actually processing the harder things. And I think it starts in the elementary school years because we're building this habit of like, just like maybe eating junk food it's like the same equivalent of like every time our kids had hard emotions, we were like, here, eat this junk food. Like, we would see that we're building this habit of understanding that junk food is how we try to solve our problems.
Here, why don't you go chill out, watch your iPad for a few minutes, self-soothe, get that dopamine bump, and then it becomes a repeated pattern.
Yeah. And all it's really doing is actually making us avoid the problems instead of problem solving the problems. And when you are bored and all you have is your thoughts, it's a productive place to actually be able to process some of the harder things, So I see personally, as a former educator in the elementary world, I saw a lot of the technological interactions being very much not monitored by the adults, and very much becoming a coping mechanism for these students and truly building a lifelong habit that I do think is challenging to break and not always the most productive habit for our kiddos, for sure. I also think that it's exposing them to a lot of like trends and stuff at a really early age. Some of the things that elementary kids say and know and do, you're just like, that is not something that I knew about until I was like a more fully developed frontal lobe and, more in my late teens, early 20s, but okay. And I think that that's causing kids to sometimes be a little bit like desensitized to the information because they get such an influx of it all the time.
Some of this might push down to the next block where we're doing like more middle school and high school, but it could just be that I'm a little bit older and maybe I do need to be thinking in context of second, third, fourth grade, not sixth, seventh, and eighth grade.
So what are some of our middle schoolers' biggest stresses that they're seeing? Let's talk through like some of their challenges, right? I think that it's a big transitional year or moment in our kids' lives. I think, you're no longer in the little school with the littler kids. You're now these bigger kids, but you're not quite adults. You can't actually do the things that you necessarily want to do. You don't quite have the independence and freedoms like a high school or college kiddo might. But you also, I think that these kids are understanding the bigger world at a much younger age than we did. So like they want to be more free and be treated more like adults in this middle school time period. But like we as parents still have an obligation to make sure our kids are safe and all these things. So I think that creates a lot of sort of internal turmoil for them where they understand big adult things, but can't actually behave or make choices like adults can. I also think that there's a lot of social pressures. I think that in middle school, they are very socially motivated. I can tell you that I taught middle school during the pandemic for a year and a half. And for sure, that social component being pulls away from them so abruptly was a huge, huge challenge for those kiddos. They seek and need, just like for me as an older lady, I seek and need peace and quiet and a hot bubble bath at night. These beings are needing, in order to fill their cups and really make them feel like they have a place in this world, they need those social interactions. And I do think that the pandemic breaking apart a lot of those social interactions for them is still very relevant, because I do think our world hasn't quite come back to the way it was pre-pandemic. I was at an event the other day and there was only two other people. And I was like, I feel like this is just post-pandemic. We kind of have all become hermits and don't get out and do the things anymore because we have, Zoom and all the things, and things come to us more, and that's become comfortable and kind of a way of life. But again, going back to the psychological place where our middle schoolers are at, that culture that we've kind of started to develop is really challenging for them. And then also, I think that it's important to name, they are also very concerned about their peers' perceptions of them. So they are oftentimes very hesitant to seek help. They're very, very aware of possible judgments from others or people thinking a certain stigma about them. They want to handle the things on their own, but they sometimes don't have the skills and tools yet to handle the things on their own. But it's also sometimes, even my son, like he's 13, he has two parents that are in this work. And really, my husband's a mental health expert as well. We talk and we can tell, and we destigmatize and we tell him all about our challenges and all the things. And it's still sometimes really hard. It's like pulling teeth to get him to just tell us the hard stuff, Tell me what you're thinking.
A lot of things. You're exactly right. Middle schoolers are not the ones who are typically going to be asking for help, whether that's academic help. We're more like what we're talking about, emotional maturity, even mental health help. There is this huge pressure, like pulling away from this, in theory, central unit of family. It's like there's a lot more involvement in other activities. Sometimes they're there by themselves for periods of time. So like the pressure from outside the unit oftentimes goes very up. And that's assuming that there is a family unit. One we didn't talk about was just biological changes. I'm not going to belabor that point too much, but there's a lot of biology going on, changing from a child into an adult, and typically the middle school years is when that happens.
There's a book out there that talks so much about how kids, and really in these middle school years is when it starts to shift, where kids are not seeking the guidance of the adults in their world as much as they are seeking their other peers to really, figure out these challenges, figure out these big real world issues. And it's it's a fascinating concept. And I do think that anybody who is working in our, world with our children is definitely seeing an increase. I was only in education for 15 years, but in that 15 years, I saw a huge shift happening. And again, I think it's that internet. I think it's these kids kind of feel like they're adults in some ways. And so they just resort to finding each other to help guide them in this stuff. And again, they're underdeveloped frontal lobes. So underdeveloped frontal lobes, helping underdeveloped frontal lobes is absolutely going to get us to a space where we're not getting the outcome we're seeking, right?
And that concept of I know it all and you don't know anything. dealing with that one.
We started that idea. Like, I think I started to feel that way in my late teens, early 20s with my parents. And I think that's happening at a lot younger age now. And I will bring into this conversation, I have a dear friend of ours who has a middle schooler who's 13, who is currently inpatient at a mental health facility. And I was telling the dad the other night, I said, I am so proud that your child knew that they needed this resource and that they took the steps needed, or took the steps to really make sure that they got the help they needed. Because again, I cannot stress it enough. I had a student unalive themselves the summer before their 13th birthday. It is a very challenging time, not just because of the hormones we all went through, not just because of the various challenging social interactions we all went through. The world that these middle schoolers are exposed to is very different than the worlds we grew up in. And, I have a 13-year-old, and he sometimes asks me questions that you can tell he's trying to figure it out. He doesn't fully understand it. And I think right now we have a lot of big world things, adult problems that are happening that the kids are getting snippets of it, and they understand the snippets of it from like the various internet and all of their social interactions, but they also don't have the frontal lobe to fully understand what is truly going on in our globe. I said this in our last episode, but I always want to say this, that it's a stage of cognitive dissonance. It's the start of that stage of cognitive dissonance where you are really starting to understand the big real world. Of course, we don't have mental health classes or some of these more abstract human type learning opportunities, because those don't necessarily equate to fuller pockets in the workforce, right? So I think it is a whole new challenge, right? Every time you kind of go to that next step, it's new challenges. You're closer and closer to that big real world. I think that high schoolers feel a lot of academic pressure. I was actually just at my dentist the other day, and she was talking about the college pressure in this area. I grew up in a very similar area. I always say, I think I'm the only person I know in my graduating class who didn't go to an Ivy League. Very high stress. But I think that it's important to also think about the academic pressures on the other side of the socioeconomic spectrum. I have worked mostly with marginalized communities, low-income communities, things like that. And there's still a lot of academic pressure. I want to be the first person of my family to actually graduate high school or make a difference, or my parents immigrated here to give me this opportunity. I better not waste this opportunity and make sure that I am always doing my very best in school and things. I know, because my parents have raised me to know this, that my ticket out of this space in my life is to take this seriously and really make sure that I get scholarships or whatever, right?
I couldn't have said it better. The academic stuff exponentially goes up. The GPA matters. Whether or not the ninth grader realizes it, that's some of the issue. That's that frontal lobe. Oh, well, I'll worry about that next year. It's like, this now stays on the record. You get one high school GPA or GED. And it's not like the ninth grade F you got in intro to bio just disappears with all the straight A's later on. So it's even without the awareness, that academic pressure is there. And then the same thing happens in college again.
Well, and then also extracurricular demands, right? So, it's wild, because here where I live, compared to where I grew up in DC, there's a very intense scholarship sort of energy here of
you good at soccer and you can go to college.
Yeah, again, and this isn't a necessarily lower socioeconomic or higher socioeconomic. I have worked in both sort of demographics and communities, and I have seen a really intense extracurricular pressure that we put on these kids. You have to get a scholarship, or just living vicariously through me. I want you to do better and be better, and this is one avenue to do so. And I think that those pressures do weigh on our kiddos for sure. Okay, let's also talk about accessing mental health. If we've identified that, I think elementary school, they are trying to figure out how to access help. And sometimes I think they get a little deflated by trying to get that access and not getting the access. So then by middle school, they're oftentimes peer pressured into not accessing mental health and things like that. Tell me your thoughts on high schoolers. Do you feel like they're more like open to getting this kind of help?
Such a broad question. I can see both sides, and it's going to be individualized based on school district, individual child. Because you can ask one, be like, yeah, I got great mental health care. And another one's like, I never knew mental health care existed.
Or even what the parents believe. Yeah.
Add that as a big umbrella, like cultural differences surrounding mental health. And again, in the 50s and this, even in the United States, like you saw mental health as you were at the state hospital, like you lived there, you were institutionalized. It's different now than me and my adult sister are having some problems and I want to go talk this out with somebody. Different types of problems, serious persistent mental illness, psychosocial stressors. And then adding in, don't know, first level, second level, like coming to the United States, there can be a lot of layers to that. So even the same school district, same socioeconomic area, you might have two vastly. So I can't really answer that question. How is it for the average high schooler? I think it's honestly better. This is just my anecdotal thought. It's better than when I was in high school, which was in the late 90s.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I was going to say, I work a lot with youth in this work, and we have a junior board, and I've taught this class, and it's always so fascinating because I do think that our next gen is really, they not only understand mental health and all things that are challenges within our brains a lot better than we did. They embrace it, I think, and they destigmatize it a lot more. I always say that being exposed to all the world's knowledge in like microbursts of information has made them have a very intense mental health crisis going on. They're seeing things they can't unsee. But on the flip side, it's making them far more empathetic, far more educated, and far more self-aware than I think any other generation before, because they are getting these microbursts and they're seeing like the worst and the best of humanity in like large scale and really deciding kind of where they want to live in that spectrum of humanity. But I do think, when I would teach this or anytime I interact with the younger adults and teens, they're always like, oh yeah, no, I have ADHD and bipolar. And like, they're very, it's kind of like their resume when they do their intros, and they're like, they're totally good with, I shouldn't say totally, but they're a lot more comfortable with destigmatizing it for the most part. And they are a lot more intrigued and interested and motivated to try to figure out some of these solutions on how they can, I think all humans want to do better. Like, I don't want to make a bad peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I want to know how to make it correctly so that's enjoyable and best for me, right? Same ideology with how we function in the world,
The double-edged sword, like I see the benefits of let's talk about it, as opposed to if you told me at age 18, somebody is neurodivergent, I would have been like, I don't even know what that means. And now it's like neurospicy, and that can be indicative of autism, ADHD, cognitive disabilities, et cetera. So like that it's being talked about is great. The flip side of that coin is there can be some over self-diagnosis. Oh, I am this and I am that, and that's why I can't, or how the world should necessarily treat me. It's like the world is it doesn't always work that way. But I do love that the discussion is out there.
For sure. And I think, my husband always reminds me often that progress is slow. And I think I feel very honored and privileged to have been able to go on this mental health journey when I did. But it does take a while for humanity to embrace these changes, embrace the needs for looking and being introspective in these types of ways. Let's talk about our college kiddos. So they exit our K-12s. I think, we have this clip of Jessica, and she talks a lot about how school really prepared her for this workforce, but didn't necessarily prepare her to understand the greater implications of our larger world.
My high school did not prepare me well enough for any of what I witnessed or experienced. They gave no advice on how to balance like personal life and work and education, but they did give advice on time management and meeting deadlines, how to write a paper, but nothing really to assess emotional challenges and stuff that we face and obstacles that occur in life. I didn't really get much of that. To be honest, any mental health issues that I ever faced actually showed up in college, not high school, so I didn't even know about it. You just had to learn a lot of things on your own. I also wish I knew that it's okay to reach out to others and do not isolate when you are sad and stuff, because it might feel like, oh, maybe I need to isolate. But no, it's actually best to actually reach out to someone. They can actually make you feel better. I wish they just prepare us on what to expect in the real world and be like really realistic, like just not like the basics. Oh, you get a job, you get married one day. Like, no, tell me what happens in between and what comes with each thing so that you get prepared and you're not like surprised along the way. You are on your own. You have like your own responsibilities. Like if you're living on campus, you do your own laundry. You have to set a schedule for yourself. You have to have discipline.
She did wish that she had gotten some of those supports so that transition from this more controlled bubble in our high school or educational, our K-12 environment, to then being in maybe your own apartment, maybe going to classes on your own, really relinquishing any control that you have in that more protected bubble that you were in. And really, it sounds like to me for her, it felt like kind of like this pop of this bubble. And she was just kind of thrown into the real world and not fully prepared for
There's
it.
so much that happens. It's like car insurance, health insurance, potentially a part-time job, taxes. What are taxes? Yeah, I know what taxes are, but like how the heck do I, or you pay somebody to do it, like, but that also costs money. And most of the times we don't just enter adulthood with a big pile of gold sitting on the side here. So it's like underfinanced and sometimes undereducated because parents want to make their lives easier for their kids and ultimately for themselves too. So sometimes it's just easier to do it myself as the adult. But the child needs to be learning how to cook, how to fix food. Otherwise, you're just eating out and Uber Eats gets awfully expensive really fast. So like all of these things happen literally in the summer between most likely senior year of high school and freshman year of college or entering the workforce or going in the military. That's a really steep learning curve.
And I think going back to like the socioeconomic bracket in which a lot of our college kids live in, it's interesting. We have been working with C-Corps, and I know you're familiar with C-Corps, Darren, because you go there, but it is a local food bank near us. They are tied to Southeast Christian Church, and they do a really incredible job of really making sure that people have access to the things, but also are able to keep their integrity intact. So they have set it up like a grocery store instead of just a traditional food bank, which I really love. But I got to do a tour there, and we've developed a great partnership with them. And in that tour, the woman who runs the facility, she said, we have a truck that I forget what they call the truck, but it's, like an open market kind of truck, and it's all free. And they go to communities and they hand out food for free. And I said, that's so amazing. Where do you mostly go? And she was like, well, you'll be shocked to know this, but we mostly go to colleges because we think of college as a privilege. But statistically, a lot of our college students are some of our poorest people in our country. Yes, they maybe have this opportunity that feels like a privilege to go to college, but it's still like putting them maybe in debt, or they're doing it on a scholarship while trying to work minimum wage job while also trying to put themselves through, all the things, right? And it's just a demographic that, I am in the community really helping a lot of people that financially can't make ends meet and stuff. And it's like, oh, that was an eye opener for me. Like, oh, of course, college kids, that makes so much sense that we, need to make sure that we're supporting our college kids in that way. But talk about mental health. That is a huge stressor when you are struggling to feed yourself on top of maybe gaining a lot of debt, on top of trying to sustain a potentially crappy job, while also doing your main goal of learning. Yeah.
And also learning this life stuff, the car insurance, the taxes, the this, the that. And yeah, you can be on parents, some of this stuff, but like it is just vastly different than this standard 12th grade experience. And whether that's in college or working a first like full-time job.
I would agree 100%. And I think, again, if you go to any of our students, they would say they wished somebody had taught them these things prior to like that Band-Aid being pulled off, because it would have helped them be able to process some of those big changes a lot more easily. And I would definitely say that's what we hear in Jessica's quotes and things like that.
So these stories show that investing in mental health resources early and earlier only or really often sets children up for long-term success as adults.
I cannot tell you how many people in this work with me have said, I wish I had something like this when I was a kid. But if there's one thing we've learned today is that every student definitely has their own story, and those stories can really help inspire change, growth, what we can do to help, and really help our kids become more resilient community members. So here are some takeaways from this series or this episode. Storytelling is really powerful. I know for me, I hear lots of stories. I am in the community. I'm married to a police officer in the community. I've done a lot of work in the community, and these stories, every single one always impacts me and inspires me to really continue to break stigmas, encourage others to talk about their challenges, and change some of our shame culture in our society. I think another takeaway for me is that seeking help is not a weakness. I've always known this, but I think I'm always really inspired by our students. When the next gen, we think of them as being less capable or less whatever as the adults in the world. But I think this is a way that I'm really inspired by the kiddos and those that are younger. They are very transparent with their challenges. They're very transparent about who they are and how they show up in this world. And I think that is a really amazing strength that we can all be inspired by. And then I think my last takeaway is really how much schools have the ability to potentially play a vital role in our students' futures. I think that they encounter most of their transitional challenges in those informative years. And I think that if schools are able to really build and structure more supports in this way and really adapt an educational system and program that helps those students for the next steps in life, we could really have a society that feels a lot more mentally in control of their own challenges.
So now it's your turn, and we want to hear from you. Have you or someone you know experienced challenges with mental health while in school? What support made the difference? Share your story with us at unplugged@undumindset.org. One more time, unplugged@undumindset.org.
And don't forget to subscribe, rate, review, anything you can do to help us on this mission. I truly don't think that this is just a mission for us. It is truly a movement. We want to be in all the communities, supporting as many communities as we can in this way, but that takes help. I need you all as our village. So the more you can subscribe, the more you can review, like, whatever, the more we can get our mission out there and really support all of the communities that we're hoping to support. Follow us on all of our socials at Undo Unplugged. Our podcast, you can find us on any of the podcasting platforms. Your support really helps to spread these important conversations and bring more awareness to our student mental health. Thank you for tuning in to Undo Unplugged. Remember, every student deserves a safe space to grow, learn, and thrive.
Never too late to undo your mindset. So until next time, take care.